we're out hiking today on Anderson Hill here in Victoria, and we thought that this would be a great opportunity for us to talk about some of the differences between life here in Canada and our life in the UK, since we spend time in both places.
And this is something we do at both places, is go for walks. Some things are very similar and some things are very different. So we thought we'd kind of go through a list. And then at the end, we're going to talk about which one we think, for us anyway, is more expensive. Not saying which one's better. We're not going to play favorites, but we will say which one we find more cost effective.
It costs us more. So we've got lots of different categories that we're going to compare the two places, and you can come along for the hike with us.
Okay, so one of the big differences that we find between Canada being the UK is the weather and the nature. Of course, a lot of Canada gets snow through the winter time. Where we are on the west coast, we don't. We get a very similar climate to the UK, except as you can see, like even where we are, it's very kind of dramatic landscape, lots of rocks. You kind of have to stick to provincial pathways or parks, where what we find in the UK is you get to kind of roam wherever, right? You have the right to roam, so you can cut through someone's farm and be walking with their cows or their horses, which you simply cannot do here. I mean, you can, but it's trespassing. Where we are in Kingston, there's a couple of really big parks by us, Bushy Park and Richmond Park, and it's not kind of rocky like this, right? It's more flat field. I like the access that we have in the UK more so than here. We end up doing a lot of the same places here because it's
limited, right? It's like prescribed places where you can go hiking and walking, and it feels like there's way more places to go in the UK. But for me, in terms of like the nature differences, is the wildlife. That's a huge difference for me.
Yeah, I mean, we could be being watched right now. Cougars or mountain lions, whatever you want to call them. Not so much here in Victoria, we hope, but there are a lot on the island.
Vancouver Island, it's the most highly concentrated population
and if you
of
don't know what
in the
a
world.
Cougar is, look it up, because I saw one for the first time in real life, and they're massive. They're huge cats.
And bears, there's cougars, there's bears, there's nothing like that in the UK. You can be
aggressive cow, maybe.
Quite confident, maybe like a badger.
Yeah. Which can be very vicious.
They can be vicious,
yeah.
But we've got some serious predators here in Canada. And so, I don't know, for me, maybe this is just a little quirk of mine, but I always feel a little uneasy.
And we'd love to hear comments from you. If there's a good place to go hiking around Richmond, Kingston in London, or I think we know most of the places here in Victoria, but let us know, because this kind of rocky stuff on the side of the ocean feels very distinctly different here than what we walk around in
in and it is nice, like here on the west coast, being so close to the ocean. Like this is obviously the ocean that you can see in the background here. That's just a little bay in our area. So yeah, there's lots of natural beauty. There's no doubt about that.
So I'm not prepared to kind of give one or the other kind of my vote. I think they're both really lovely in their own ways.
So another big difference that we've noticed between life in Canada and life in the UK is when it comes to shopping. This is a completely different experience when we're in the UK versus Canada. Department stores in the UK are thriving. There's lots of them. They are bustling places. People seem to shop there regularly. And there's some really old department stores that have been there for a long time, like Harrods and Selfridges and all that.
But even the Marks and Sainsbury's.
Yeah, Marks and Spencer and John Lewis.
Tesco,
there's lots. But in Canada, we especially recently have really struggled with department stores. We do have some old department stores, like the Hudson's Bay Company. It was a really old company, like
fur trading company.
Yeah, fur trading and trapping company. The origins of Canada, but it just actually last week went into liquidation. And I mean, we've noticed in the last couple of years that just going shopping in the Bay, it's just like a ghost town.
But prior to that, we lost Eaton's, we lost Sears.
Yeah, and some American department stores have tried to come into Canada and make a go of it, like Nordstrom. We had Nordstrom for a little while, we had Target for a little while, but it just never really seems to take. So yeah, people in Canada just don't seem to shop in department stores in the same way that they do in the UK. So that's one difference with shopping. Another is with charity shops. In the UK, there are so many charity shops, which is amazing. Like, take any little town or village and they usually have like half a dozen charity shops in there, like really well organized, well stocked, clean, great places.
Quick turnover.
We really enjoy shopping in charity shops when we're there in the UK, but that just doesn't exist at all here in Canada. And then grocery stores, that's also a massive difference. Grocery shopping in the UK is a pleasure for me. For one thing, groceries are so much less expensive in the UK than in Canada. I don't know if that's a surprise to viewers to hear how that groceries in Canada are incredibly expensive and getting worse all the time, of course. And it didn't used to be like that. Like, I remember going to the UK when I was much younger, and everything was a lot more expensive in the UK, but it seems like Canada has become more expensive, just regular costs like groceries and things that you would buy on a day-to-day basis, and now has surpassed it. But the selection, the variety in the UK is way better. All the grocery stores like Marks & Spencer Food, of course, and Waitrose, and Tesco, and Aldi, like there's just a lot of, Sainsbury, lots of choices of great grocery stores, and the fresh, like that pre-prepared food, like fresh pre-prepared meals.
Which is all we
eat. That you can find in the UK. So many gorgeous options, which is really fun to try new things in UK grocery stores. Another really obvious difference between Canada and the UK is just the sheer size of the country. Like, Canada obviously is a huge country, second largest country in the world, and very, very very sparsely populated.
Most people live within 10 miles of the American border. And where we are on Vancouver Island, which is smaller than the UK, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a 6-hour drive from tip to tip in
it's a huge,
Victoria.
Even Vancouver Island
and that's just
itself
the island is small for a small part of Canada.
It's a very small part
right?
of Canada.
To drive across Canada.
We've driven a couple of times across, well, not even the entire country. From Toronto out to the west. And it takes days and days and days to drive.
And can be very remote. Like the time when we were driving and we couldn't get a radio station for like hours, and all of a sudden we just heard music and we were like, what happened? Oh, we just got a signal. Because
it had been searching
for hours. Yeah, and in the UK, I remember telling someone years ago that we were driving to Hadrian's Wall, and they're like, wow, you're driving way up there. And I was like, that's like a daily commute.
Yes, exactly. You can travel the entirety of the UK. I mean, we took a train to Scotland and it was a few hours or maybe several hours, but still. Anyway, big difference between Canada and the UK, and I love it in the UK, actually. It is cool that Canada's so big, but in the UK there's so many different places that you can go to, and it just doesn't take that long to get there. If you want to go somewhere else in Canada, you have to really commit to like a big journey.
The same distances in the UK, like we could go in one direction and go to Bath in a couple hours, another direction we can go to York in a few hours. Like, everything's very close.
Yeah, and of course this also creates a big difference with the public transportation. Like, the rail network in the UK is so sophisticated and highly developed and has been there for a long time, of course. And I mean, in Canada we have one rail line that goes across.
As part of our constitution, right? I mean, the Confederation was built. We have a railway that goes from all the way east, all the way west, and then there's not much after that.
That's it. Yeah. So it's very car dependent in Canada. You're just, if you're going somewhere, you're generally going in a car.
And subway, like
or an airplane.
The tube system in London is far superior to anything we have here. We just got a subway line put in Vancouver. It has one line, they're working on a second line. Like, it's early days for our subway system. The next thing that we wanted to talk about in differences was the kind of leisurely and pastime activities.
And sports.
Sports, well, that's a pastime.
I guess, yeah.
And really, I suppose weather again plays a big role in that, because things like hockey, I mean, when I was teaching over there and people would ask me about playing hockey, I would have to say ice hockey. Of course, in Canada, we don't say ice hockey, we just say hockey, because field hockey is not a very popular sport here. Hockey's a very big sport here. Huge. It's our national sport, along with lacrosse, which is also very popular, but just not to the extent. And then we get the American influences of course, like the NFL and the NBA, and we have a couple.
Yeah, baseball, basketball, football.
Toronto has a couple of major league teams in baseball.
And we have Canadian Football League too.
And there's a CFL, Canadian Football League.
Which is football, like American style football, not football that's in the UK.
Yeah, and we do have a number of soccer leagues, football leagues.
It's getting more interest, I think.
Yeah, Vancouver has teams, and Victoria now has a team. Don't ask me what divisions they are, I'm not sure. It's nothing like the Premiership.
No, not even close.
And certainly players aren't paid anywhere close to what they get paid in the Premiership. Premiership kind of money you'll only find in North America in things like football and baseball.
But it's winter sports predominantly in Canada, don't you find? Skiing and anything that has to do with skating, cross-country skiing, downhill skiing.
Like, when we're in the UK, the sports is dominated by Premiership. And then some
and then
rugby,
you got your rugby,
maybe tennis, if Wimbledon is on.
Cricket.
Yes,
things that
cricket.
we don't
get
get
cricket at all.
Here.
I'd go to a pub and asked them to put on an NFL game, and people would look at me like, why would you want to watch that? It's so boring. It's so slow. I was like, cricket lasts for like 3 days. What do you mean it's so slow? But I think sports are one of those things that whatever you get into, you can get into, right?
Yeah.
So rowing
on the
together,
West Coast, there's definitely more rowing here in Canada.
And Canada competes well in rowing.
Yep. The Olympics.
Yeah, but it's definitely regional in our country.
Yeah, so it's interesting. I think more differences than similarities, honestly.
We don't have hooligans. We don't have hockey hooligans, though, so it's not unusual to see maybe a bit of a fight break out at a sports event, but it's a rare occasion. It certainly isn't the same extent that we see with soccer in the UK.
Okay, we also wanted to talk about a couple of things that are also different in terms of healthcare and education. There's maybe more similarities than differences between Canada and the UK in healthcare. And obviously I worked in healthcare for many years in Canada, never worked in healthcare in the UK. But the healthcare system in Canada is strictly a public system. It is state funded entirely. That is the main difference between Canada and the UK, is that in the UK there is, of course, the NHS, state funded public system, but there's also a second parallel private healthcare system, which we don't have in Canada. When it comes to education, so that's another thing that we can speak about, because Ken has actually taught in Canada and in the UK.
The formality in the UK is much more so than it is in Canada. And again, we have both private schools and public schools, just as the UK does. But even in the public school system, people are wearing uniforms. I was called Sir all the time. By contrast, once upon a time was called Mr. Foster, but now a lot of the students just call me Ken.
Right.
So,
yeah,
I mean,
super casual education system
more
in
formal.
Canada.
But in terms of the style of education, very similar in that approach. I would say that as kids get a bit older, with the GCSEs, there's a lot more, I think, stress placed on students in their final couple of years in the UK. Yeah. The other thing that I found, and I don't know if this is still true, but there's a lot less stigma in the UK about going to college for trades. In Canada, we've been trying for years to encourage kids to go into the trades, but there still seems to be quite a stigma that you need to go to university in order to be successful at what you do. And in the UK, this doesn't seem to have the same sort of stigma. Maybe they have a richer history of blue-collar workers. I'm not really sure, or if they're struggling, because we really struggle in Canada with having enough blue-collar workers to get by with electricians, plumbers, tradespeople. In the UK, that seems to be something that students go into quite freely, and it doesn't seem to be a lesser than path.
Another difference is the holidays, right?
Here,
the school schedule.
When I was teaching in high school here, I could have taught for 3 months without a break, but in the UK, it got to the point where if I wasn't getting a break after 8 weeks, I was like exhausted.
Yeah, so there's more frequent holidays. In Canada, we get the one big holiday in the summer. We get a full, like both months, July and August are off.
The other difference that parents may not be aware of is that you have the same teacher almost every year. So when I was teaching history in the UK, and when I met with parents, they're like, well, our child is now having a different teacher again this year. And as a Canadian, I thought, right, because it's a new year, so you get a new teacher. But there, you would have the same teacher who taught you history for like 3 or 4 years. And so there's a lot more continuity in the education system there.
Yeah, I mean, I can see there being advantages and disadvantages to both of those systems, right? Like, I mean, having grown up in Canada and been educated in Canada, I'm pretty accustomed to each year, absolutely, having a different teacher.
And if you liked your teacher, it was great that you got stuck with them for 4 years, but also you get there's that fresh start idea.
From a student perspective, it's good if you have a teacher that you like. It's not so great if you have a teacher that you don't like, but then you get a new teacher next year, so you have another shot at it. And we have kind of this random category, kind of a grab bag of like cultural differences between Canada and the UK. The biggest one, I think, is the royals. Royal watching is just this absolutely huge thing in the UK. All the magazines have got photographs of all the royals, and it's on the news, like on the TV every day, talking about what the royals are up to. And in Canada, even though we do have the same royal family, like the king is our king, we just don't report on it or talk about it or hear about it even nearly as much as we do. So that's a big difference. What are some other cultural differences?
I think some of the events, like the annual events.
Yeah, like holidays and stuff. So of course in Canada we have Canadian Thanksgiving, different than US Thanksgiving, but we still have Thanksgiving, which we don't have in the UK. Halloween, I have noticed, has become a bigger deal now in the UK.
20 years ago, it
was a non-event.
We used to go around and knock on people's door to give them candy and say, my son's going to come around, can you give him some candy?
Yeah, that was fun. Disappointing for a Canadian kid to be experiencing his Halloween in the UK before it really was a thing. Yeah. But yeah, it does seem to be a bit more of a thing now in the UK. Guy Fawkes is not celebrated, of course not, but it's a big deal there. So it's kind of fun, like there's different holidays holidays and cultural differences. Wimbledon seems to be a really big deal.
Especially in London, it seems to just dominate the
of course. That makes perfect sense. And the races like Royal Ascot, I don't know if I'm saying that right. I don't think I am.
So, horse racing isn't really a big thing. Maybe a little bit in Toronto, but not really anywhere else in the country.
Other cultural differences that we've noticed are there seems to be a bit more smoking in the UK.
Yeah, they haven't got the memo.
These are sweeping generalizations, but we have noticed that there does seem to be still a bit more smoking in the UK, and likewise also drinking. Pub culture is a big deal in the UK. It's not that we don't drink in Canada. There just seems to be...
We do it by ourselves at our homes to stave off the freezing winters.
Yeah, like public drinking. I don't know. Well, also in Canada, you're not allowed to drink in public, which maybe UK viewers don't realize. You can only consume alcohol in your home or in licensed establishments. So if it's a restaurant or a bar, but you can't just be in a park or at a beach or having a picnic with alcohol. It's not allowed anywhere in Canada. Is that true, or has that changed?
Well, liquor's provincial, but the other thing is in the UK you don't often walk through clouds of pot, where that's very typical,
very common,
especially here on the West Coast.
On the West Coast of Canada, there's a lot of marijuana use. Yeah. Anyway, kind of some interesting cultural differences. Okay, so we are back at home now, getting warmed up. We've got some tea sitting by the fire because it was actually a little bit chillier out there than we were expecting. We're going to wrap up with our, as promised, discussion and analysis of the cost of living differences between the two places.
Very informal analysis.
Yes,
based on our experience.
Research or anything like this, and it's completely subjective, totally based on our own experiences. But what did we think in terms of the differences?
So we've kind of broken it down into a few different categories. The first one we'll start with what most people are probably interested in if you're watching our channel and this bi-continental lifestyle is real estate. It's interesting because what we found is that Kingston is more affordable to buy, but Vancouver is more affordable to rent. So in Canada, there's quite a disparity between the cost of real estate and what you can get for rent. Rent being much lower than what it would cost to carry, versus in London, what you can buy, you can rent out for, and we found quite easily carry your mortgage payment. So I don't know who you give a win to there, but depending if you're renting or buying, will determine which one's more affordable for you. The next thing we looked at, the taxes really end up being very similar in both countries. Not a big surprise, Canada being a Commonwealth, we follow a lot of the same property rules, property taxes versus council taxes. One thing I will say, the tax being calculated on goods when you're buying them in the UK is really nice, versus in Canada where you get that little surprise of 7 or 15% on top of whatever you're buying. It doesn't feel great.
No.
Commute, again, London has a far more sophisticated commuter system.
Yeah, which we talked about before, like transportation network is much more sophisticated.
Yeah, traffic's bad in both. Traffic in London is bad and traffic in Vancouver is bad. For affordability, Vancouver's probably more affordable in terms of the cost of commuting. Gas is much more expensive in the UK than it is here. But even just the public transportation, I think we are cheaper. We're kind of dollar to pound, which right now is trading at like 1.8 or something. So it is quite a bit cheaper. Travel, you want to chime in on the travel?
Yeah, so travel, like leisure travel, not just commuting and getting around, but like actually taking trips. So this one is way less expensive in the UK. London is a huge hub, of course, internationally.
Four
and
airports.
Is lots of airport and so close to Europe and so many different places to go. And there are all those low-cost airlines.
Yeah, Ryanair.
EasyJet, all that stuff. We don't have any of that.
We do have some, but they seem to go away as quickly as they
come, they go, nothing really sticks. To fly Air Canada is our national airline. Yeah. I do like Air Canada. It's actually improved a lot in recent years, but it is very pricey. It's very expensive to fly within Canada. Again, those big distances that we talked about.
And the airports are taxed very heavily.
It's heavy taxes on the airports. So it's expensive to fly within Canada and insanely expensive to get out of Canada if you're planning to go somewhere else.
For comparison's sake, as a family of 4, it will cost the same, roughly, for one of us to fly somewhere in Canada as it would for 4 of us to fly to somewhere in Europe. Yeah. So we could go to Greece or Spain for the 4 of us for the price of what it would cost one of us to fly to, say, Toronto within Canada.
Yeah, and it's so appealing in the UK to do those short little jaunts. Like we just go, you can go for a weekend to Rome, you can go for a weekend to Austria. Like we went to Vienna during Christmas time when we were there, and we went to Greece when we were there for, a longer period of time. Like it's just, there's so
We're not quite Australia. Australians tend to travel for very long periods of time because it's a big deal to get off the island. But it kind of feels like that sometimes for us as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I think in terms of affordability, if you travel a lot, you'll definitely have a lot more savings flying in and out of London than you would anywhere in Canada. Our next one is food, which we talked about a little bit already. And I think we're kind of saying it's much more affordable.
Much more affordable in the UK.
I went to buy celery and it came through at $7 for a celery stalk. Now, typically in Canada, it might be around $3 to $4. And I said, there must be a mistake. And the young man said, no, it's $7. At which point I said, you guys can keep your celery. By contrast, at Marks and Spencer's, they had pre-washed, pre-cut celery. And I think it was like 60 or 70 pence. Like it was a world of difference in terms of pricing. So yeah, I mean, the community
And that's just
factors,
celery.
the cost.
There's nothing exotic about that.
The next one we had was utilities, which again, depending on what utilities you're talking about, Kim mentioned petrol or gas is much cheaper in Canada. But the other big difference is things like internet, like Wi-Fi connections for your flat, or
Mobile
phones.
Oh my God.
Which are both far less expensive in the UK than they are in Canada. Again, I think it's regulatory. Yeah. We don't have a lot of competition here, and in the
I feel like we get gouged on cell phone fees here in Canada.
Yeah.
It's what is it like? It's $100 per month.
Sometimes, yeah. It wouldn't be unusual to have a $100 plan, and in the UK we pay £10.
Yeah, £10 for just a pay-as-you-go kind of thing.
Yeah, which is the expensive way to do it.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Yeah, and then same thing, Wi-Fi is, I think it's about a third of the cost, maybe even less than that, a quarter of the cost. So really, overall, what we have found, personal experience, yeah, is that life is cheaper in the UK. And had you asked me that before this experience, that is not my takeaway. It would have definitely been, London's got to be much more expensive. And in many ways it is, but if you're a home buyer in the UK, aside from going through the headaches, because buying real estate in the UK is an absolute nightmare. We might do a different video on that compared to Canada. Canada, it's like a walk in the park to do a real estate deal in comparison. In the UK, you rip out people's fingernails in order to purchase a property. Like it is
Okay,
torture.
we're not going to get into that. Right. Stop.
However, once you do get through that process, the ownership does tend to be less expensive than what it would cost to buy in, say, a Vancouver market.
But in general, the cost of living, this is what we found, currently in the UK is much less expensive than it is in Canada. And yeah, I would never have said that before either. I remember the first time that we did a sabbatical in the UK when we were younger, before we had kids, and people thought we were crazy. They were saying, why would you do a sabbatical in such an expensive place to live? And I agreed. I mean, it didn't really make a lot of sense. It's what we wanted to do, but it was going to a much more expensive place to live on a day-to-day basis. And now that's not the case. Yeah. So interesting.
A lot of things were the same. We found dining out prices were similar, going out to shows, movies. Yeah. Those were all kind of the same. So we're just trying to point out what some of the differences are.
Yeah, and some things cancel each other out. So anyway, that's all of the main differences that we wanted to kind of round up between what we have observed in our life in Canada and our life in the UK. Would absolutely love to know your experiences. If you have found something different, would love to hear about that. If you agree with some of the stuff that we have talked about and touched on, then let us know in the comments, because I would love to have more of a conversation about this and see what different experiences. And also, of course, we were making big generalizations about, because the part of the UK that we are most familiar with is where we live in the south, in Greater London area.
Which we thought was a good comparison to Vancouver.
Yeah, we thought it was a good comparison, but I'd love to hear about, I have a feeling that the cost of living and things like that in the north part of the UK would be less expensive, Scotland maybe.
And to be fair, Kingston is not the most expensive neighborhood in London, whereas Vancouver arguably is the most expensive, aside from a few neighborhoods in Toronto. It is most expensive. So we're trying to like comparisons here.
Yeah, but we had lots of fun doing this roundup, and I hope that you enjoyed it too, and we'll see you in the next video.